In this video, I'm going to teach you an easy way to learn and actually remember phrasal verbs. Many learners of English find phrasal verbs to be one of the most difficult things to get right. But don't worry, because with these top tips, you'll be using phrasal verbs in everyday conversation in no time. Imagine being able to confidently use phrases like break up, catch up, or put up with without hesitation. Well, by the end of this video, that dream will have become a reality. Make sure you stay until the end of the video where I will share a special phrasal verbs challenge that you can take part in. Now, let's get started. My first top tip for learning and remembering phrasal verbs is to learn them by categories. This means breaking them down into different categories that you would see and use in everyday life, and then specifically focusing on phrasal verbs that can be used in these situations. For example, you could look at all the phrasal verbs that are used to describe movement. This could be get up, sit down, turn around. There are lots of phrasal verbs to describe our physical movements, so think about all the different movements that you might do throughout the day, then see if you can match a phrasal verb to each movement. Another category could be communication-related phrasal verbs, such as bring up, call off, get back to, put off. These phrasal verbs can be used to talk about when we're communicating with people, either in speaking or writing. You could also group phrasal verbs into work and study, verbs that are often used to talk about actions that you perform at work or things that you do while you're in a school or a university. For example, hand in, as in to hand in an assignment. Take on, such as take on a project. Catch up, for example, catch up on work. All of these phrasal verbs can be used in a work or study context, and it can be really helpful to group them together. Let me know in the comments if you can think of any more categories for phrasal verbs, and maybe we can all work together to get a great list on the go. The next tip is to use visual stories. If you can visualize a story and connect it to the phrasal verbs, it will make them easier to remember. For example, if you've just finished studying phrasal verbs connected with work or study, I'd like you to tell a story in your head, or even better, say it out loud or write it down, and see how many phrasal verbs you can use. For example, yesterday I got up early so that I could get started on my assignment. I had to hand it in that morning. I hadn't done much work that week, so I had a lot to catch up on. I really wish I hadn't taken on so much work during this semester. So you can see how by connecting these phrasal verbs to a particular story and then visualizing it in your mind, it will really help you to remember the meaning more clearly. Tip number 3 is to use the phrasal verbs in context. When you learn a new phrasal verb, try to connect it to a memory or a thought that is specific to you. For example, you've just learned the phrasal verb look after. Think about how you can connect that phrasal verb to your everyday life. Maybe you need someone to look after your dog when you go on holiday. Perhaps you can think about the person who used to look after you when you were a child. Whatever the sentence or memory is that comes to mind, really visualize it in your head, or better yet, write it down so you can connect that phrasal verb to your memory. Maybe you just learnt the phrasal verb put up with. Think about someone at work who you feel you have to put up with. Can you imagine them in your head? Write it down. I really have to put up with this person at work and I hate it. If you can connect a strong feeling or personal memory to the phrasal verb, it will make it more memorable. Tip number 4 is to start by focusing on the most common phrasal verbs. You can easily find a common phrasal verb list by searching on the internet. Once you've got your list, go through each one and use the strategies I already mentioned to memorize them. Use them in context, tell yourself a visual story, or even group them together. By learning the most common phrasal verbs first, you're going to really set yourself up for success in being able to use them in everyday life. Here's a list to get you started of some phrasal verbs that native speakers use all the time. Take off, meaning to take off an item of clothing. Put on an item of clothing. Turn off, for example, to turn off the TV or a device. Turn on, the opposite to turn off. Look for, to look or search for something or someone. Give up, to quit or stop doing something. And look after, to care for someone or something. So you can see that I started going through some common phrasal verbs and I connected either a physical action to help me remember or an example sentence. This is how you should go through them. Now these phrasal verbs are used in daily conversation, so you'll hear them more often, which will make them much easier to remember. Once you master these, you can move on to more specific ones. Tip number 5 is to learn phrasal verbs with collocations. Collocations are groups of words that often go together, and by learning these as a phrase or a chunk, you're going to make them more memorable and you're less likely to make mistakes. Here are some examples of phrasal verbs and collocations. Look forward to. We can say we look forward to a holiday or we look forward to an event. These are common words that collocate with that phrasal verb. Put up with. You put up with bad habits. You put up with people. You might put up with the weather. So annoying things that you have to tolerate. These are common collocations for put up with. Turn off. Often used with devices. Turn off the lights. Turn off the TV. Turn off the computer. So in the future, when you learn a new phrasal verb, also try learning words that it collocates with. If you just learnt the phrase look forward to, think about what you can use that with, as it will help you to become more fluent and more confident in using the phrasal verbs. If you're enjoying these videos and finding these tips useful, then please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for lots more English language learning content. Now let's continue with the video. Tip number 6 is to use flashcards or apps to help you review the phrasal verbs. It's not enough to simply hear a word, understand the meaning, maybe write it down. It's very important to review regularly if you want to remember it. So you can either make flashcards by cutting up pieces of paper, writing the phrasal verb on one side, and then the meaning or an example on the other side. And then you can simply use these to test yourself. Or if you want to use technology, you can use an app. There are many apps out there like Quizlet, which will help you to make digital flashcards on your phone, and then you can simply test yourself by going into the app. But do make sure that once you've made these flashcards, you review them regularly, as this is going to help you remember them. Tip number 7 is to watch TV shows and movies in English and listen out for phrasal verbs. Once you start listening out for them, you'll see that they are everywhere. If you're still just starting out with your English learning journey, you can put the subtitles on, as this will help you to more easily identify the phrasal verbs. Every time a speaker uses a phrasal verb, pause the video and think about what that word means. Write it in a diary or add it to your flashcards and then review it regularly. Try to remember the context that you first heard it used in, as like I said before, attaching the phrasal verbs to a context will make them more memorable. Tip number 8 is to keep a phrasal verb journal. This is something you can combine with the previous tip. When you're watching TV and you learn a new word, open your diary and add it there. Now, when you add a new phrasal verb to your diary, make sure you include the meaning or a synonym, so a word that has the same meaning, an example sentence, and also a few different collocations that you can think of. For example, if you've just learnt the phrasal verb turn up, your example sentence could be, she turned up late for dinner. So we've put it into a context and then we're going to review it regularly to help it stay in our mind. Tip number 9 is to practice speaking with a friend or teacher and asking them to give you feedback on your use of phrasal verbs. Challenge yourself to have a conversation with a friend about your workday and see if you can use at least 5 phrasal verbs. Also, you can listen to your friend or teacher and see how many phrasal verbs they use. You never know, you might learn something new during the conversation. Remember that speaking with other people is one of the best ways to improve your English skills overall, as well as boosting your confidence and giving you an important opportunity to practice using those phrasal verbs. Tip number 10 is very important and should not be missed. That is to test yourself regularly. Like I said before, it's not enough to simply learn a new word, write it down, and then forget it, because you'll never use that word. You need to go back to it again and again. Use your flashcards, look at your journal, use them in sentences when you're speaking with friends and teachers. The more times you review these words, the more you're going to remember them. So as you can see, it does take time and effort to learn these phrasal verbs, but in the end it will be worth it because your English will be more natural. Now, I said at the end of this video there would be a fun challenge, so here it is. If you've made it this far, I would like you to write a comment using as many phrasal verbs as you can. So feel free to write a nice long comment, but the phrasal verbs need to be natural. So think about how native speakers use them and then put them in a nice comment for me to read. And I promise to read and comment on every single one. Well done if you've made it this far. If you're looking to continue learning English in a fun and interactive way, then I've got just the video for you right here.